I don't know where to start exactly, but I enjoyed the display thing talk, and I get a lot out of it. If I took some of my samples in there, they're all spindles and they're not finished, and there's 100 of them. So that's what I did. I was basically a spindle turner. I started turning when I was eight and a half. When I was 8 years old, my mother at the kitchen table on a Sunday came to my dad. I was sitting at the table, my dad was here, and she came and she says, I can't hold this frying pan, the handle spins on here. She had tightened it, so, and it had been in a fire, not in a fire, but near the heat, and it would have deteriorated. So about, he said, she said, can you fix it? He said, give me a week. What is a week? I got a coping saw and a hammer in the basement. What's going to take a week? And so about 4 days later, he came home from work. He was a fantastic welder. He welded for many years, and aluminum, which is very hard metal to weld because it doesn't change color. And so he brought home a drill that was a regular drill. And he brought home another drill that was this long. He'd welded an extension on it. And he had this funny thing laying there. And he had a hanger nail that he'd sharpen the end of. You know what a hanger nail is? A hanger nail is one with two heads. It's got and you drive it into a stud here and another one over here, and then you measure, put down here, and you hang scaffolding on it. And then you can pull the nails out because they got that second head on there. And I said, what is all this for? And so Sunday came along. This was about Wednesday. And so Sunday came along and he said, I need some help. So we went to the basement, and he had an old electric Sears drill that had a chuck on it that didn't have a key. It had a spanner on it. It was just a terrible. He didn't like it, and I didn't like it. I mean, later on, I didn't like it. It was a piece of junk. But anyway, that's what he had. And he put this on a bench. And he put a level on there, and he put this long drill in, he put the level on there. Then he started building with clamps. We called them ocean clamps. The reason they were ocean is he worked with a guy that was nuts, and instead of calling them sea clamps, they were ocean clamps. And this got this clamp down, then he had a block of wood, and he put this short drill in. Took that long drill up, put this short, drilled a hole in it, and I was running the drill. First time I'd run the drill, because I was just 8 years old. 8 years old, and he drilled all the way through, and he pounded that hanger nail in there. So that was his tailstock, and then he built some more ocean clamps on there, and he had a kind of a tool rest, and he found a drawer full. We had a drawer full of files. And it was a flat file, so it didn't have much, where to catch. And that was the tool. He took it over to the grinder, a little grinder, and he ground the end of it. Then he put a Swedish socket wrench on it. And a Swedish socket wrench is what we made fun of in a kid, because I'm 100% Norwegian, and I grew up in a town that was about 100% Norwegian for 80% of the people. And so this socket wrench, this vice grip was a Swedish socket wrench. And he put that on the end of the file, and there he had a tool and a handle. And he started to turn this handle that he drilled this wood all the way through with that long drill, and I was just amazed. I was building I was building toys, and I didn't know how to make the wheels. Oh man, my head was spinning to make these wheels. So anyway, I kept telling. So we got done with this, and he painted it. He painted cars. He was a body man. And he had brought home a little jar full of black lacquer, and he painted this lacquer on there and hung it up, and it dried real fast, so we cleaned up the place, and he gave it another coat, and then we cleaned up the floor, and he put the tools away. Pretty soon he had the third coat on there, and he put this on the frying pan. I was amazed. So I got introduced to it, and I kept asking my dad for days about these lathes. We got to get a lathe. And so we didn't get a lathe. And I was about 8 and a half, and he brought home a lathe. He'd made it work. And I think I have a picture of it, but yeah, I do. But I got so much stuff here, I'm having a little trouble. But anyway, it had had a generator from a car on it because it had two bearings on it. And then he had, it was angle iron, and he had angle irons coming up 4 posts, but the angle iron had holes in it, so he could raise his headstock up if he wanted to turn something larger. So the tool rest was over there, he could raise up the tool rest, raise up the tailstock. And I turned on this for for years. And so I made my toys, and I had buddies, and we made toys on it, and so that got me started way back when I was 8.5 years old. So I went to school, high school, and a few years later, and I had a class where I made a bookcase out of mahogany, and it was pretty nice. And I still have it, and I'm going to take it to where I move here in a few weeks. And so I got done with it, and I was waiting for the finish to dry, and I went over to where the lathes were, and I was standing there looking at the lathes. They looked pretty good to me. And they were old Rockwells, but they were basically pretty crude to what you look at today. And I looked at them, and the teacher came along, and I said, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking at these lathes." And he says, so I said to him, "Could I turn something on there?" And he looked at me up and down. No, that was my high school turning. So I went back home and turned. Well, then I still kept putzing with this lathe at home, and I wound up going to college kind of by accident. But it was a car accident that somebody came with a car, a guy I knew. And he came to my house in the early morning, Sunday morning, about 7:30, and he'd rolled his car over. He'd gone to sleep, and he rolled it over. And he wanted my dad to give a estimate on it. My dad said, "I don't do the estimates." And this is a kid that was 2 years older than me, and he was just a troublesome kid in school. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to college." And I looked at him, "You going to college?" "Yeah." He says, "In 2 years, I'll be a biology teacher." So we started talking, and pretty soon he talked me into going to college. So when I got to college, the first year, I was still putzing with this lathe once in a while. So I kind of continuously turned, you might say, but not, it might be several weeks sometimes before I touch it. But when I got to be a sophomore, they had a turning class. And this turning class, 2 turning classes, was making spindles. And you made these spindles, and then you got done. When you got done making these spindles, I got to figure out how to get out of here. You got done making these spindles. This is 35 years before Chucks came along. There's something in there I got to have. Before Chucks came along, so what you did was faceplate clearing, and you turn something like a bowl or something, or plates and stuff. So this is the class right here, and these are the spindles we made. And the first thing you did was you made a spindle. You made about 6 of these till you got the hang of the turning of it, kind of. And then there was a book, and you took this out of the book, and the teacher then had a template, and he measured them. And so then when I got done with this class, there were only about 5-6 guys in the class, and the teacher was just there. He was off on the side in a woodchopping class, other woodshop. So then we had a faceplate class, so what he told us to do was find a piece of plywood and put this together, and then when you teach woodworking, you have it on display in your shop. And so that's where that came from. Well, anyway, you can see there's this one would fit in this one would fit inside this one. They had to fit, and that's what that was all about. So I did some wood turning in college, and then I was wondering what I should do. I thought about chemistry. Physics. And I thought about geography. So I wound up with, and I liked the woodworking stuff, and I wound up being a kind of a wood teacher and a geography minor. So that's what that is. And this is from the place in Neenah. Our attorney sits up on, and I just borrowed it for this thing, and that's what that's from. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about turning, and then I want to show you this right here. This is what's sort of different when I all your beautiful stuff over there. This is a thing I made these right here and sold them, and they're used in flower arrangements, and they're this long, and you cut them off with the scissors. And I just took this apart so I could fit it in my attaché case. So this is a cattail, as you can see, and it's made for decoration. I'd make about 350 of these a year and sold them at 2 places that I sold my stuff. But I turned this spike on here. I didn't put this on a sander and do it like this. I turned this. And I turned it with my current wife helping me. We've been married 115 years. Well, 57 for me and 57 for her. It adds up to 120. But anyway, I found this piece of aluminum. It was about the size of my thumb. And it was about 1 inch in diameter and about that long. And I drilled a hole in that, put it in my metal lathe, and I drilled a hole in it, and at 1/8 inch. And I didn't drill it all the way. Then I took a real small drill and drilled all the way through. And then I put this in a chuck, this metal piece in a chuck, and she'd stand on one side of the lathe, and I'd stand on the other. And what I would do is I would buy these cattails, these dolls, 1,000 at a time. They come in a big package because I'd sold a lot of them. And I'd take them and cut them at 16 inches. And then another 16 inches, that left me 4 inches in the center, and I cut that in half. So these were 2 inches long. And so I turned them abrasively. So I would stand there with an electric drill and go like this, and then back up. And she'd put one of these little things in there and then pull it out. And then when I got done with this, she'd pull and put another one in. I would turn 20 of these a minute. And I was doing turning for 20 of the seconds, and she was inserting them and taking them out for 40. And so I asked her for 20 minutes worth of work, and we'd do about 350 of them. So my turning is a lot different. And how many days did you wait for something to dry in between? It wasn't that way. And these are finished in, then I turn this. I take these to Texas when I go down there for the winter, and I just turn these and bring them home. And when I'm in Texas, I drill the holes in each end, so then all this gets put together. The other thing that I had here that I wanted to share with you is, well, I guess this will work. Here's what I'm going to do first. I did some work for Lawrence University, and they were looking for somebody to turn something. And they had a bench that you people sat in, and it had a spindle down on the bottom, and people would sit there and they'd go like, get up and broke the spindle. So they got a hold of me, and I turned that. Then one day they came to me and they said, we need these parts turned for this house. And okay, so I found out what they were. And some college students at Lawrence on a Sunday morning were playing with a Frisbee, and in the yard, and this Frisbee got up on the roof of the house, so they crawled up the downspout and wrecked a lot of stuff on this house. I made a lot of pieces for that house. So crazy stuff happens, so if you think about that as turning in 20 seconds or 3 seconds, this is some turning I did for Lawrence, and it took me about 4 hours to turn them. So there's a difference between a second and 4 hours. And these are the Lawrence Chapel, if you know where it is in Appleton, has these pillars on it, and they rot on the bottom. So what I did here is, they didn't fit on my lathe, so I turned them outboard. And my lathe wasn't powerful enough, so I made a gadget that turned a pulley on the faceplate, and then mounted a different motor over here and just let it run through the headstock. So these things I could, it would take I'd have help from another man just to load them on the lathe. And then I'd turn these bases for these pillars, because they're sitting on cement and they'd rot out on the bottom. And it was about 30 years ago, and I noticed there's a curtain over there that I think that rotted out again, and it's because the weather gets them. And 2 of these would fit in the back of my car. I had to turn 4 of them. I had to make 2 trips to Lawrence just to deliver them. Yeah, the diameter is 22 inches, and the height was about 11 and a half. And, they're massive. But I turned them, and I did other turning for them, too. But I'll send these around. You can look at it. Glued up. They were pieces that were about 6 inches wide and 2 inches thick, and they were stacked up. So that's different stuff that I turned. The other thing I want to talk about here is, besides my turning, messing up here. What did I do with my paperwork? Oh, here it is. As time went on, I turned off and on for people, for the neighbors. And then I came to Appleton in 1966. And I still was putzing with a lathe, but I still lived in a little apartment. And so I was teaching printing. So I was a typesetter printer from when I was 15 years old. And so I'd go to the school and I'd turn stuff after classes. I'd turn stuff once in a while. But after a few years, my wife and I got married, and we lived at 500 East Roosevelt Street. And I did a lot of repairing on this old house. It was a well-built 2-story brick house. It was sound, but the people that lived there turned out to be drunks, and there was all kinds of stuff to fix. So I was looking for a lathe, and I found an ER10. And we know what an ER10 is? I'm seeing some heads go this way. An ER10 was a very early shopsmith where everything was out in the open belt, exposed belt with a cover on it. And so I found this for $100. And I thought, hey, I got a lathe, I got a drill press, I got a table saw. And so I did a lot of turning on that. And I didn't take long. And I knew the wood teacher, Bob Schultz, at East pretty well. And the two of us, he came into my room one time and he says, I'm going to go out to see Jim Clapper. And Jim Clapper was a guy from down south, and he came to Neenah, and I don't know if he rented or bought it, an old cheese factory. They got closed down because the state came in and started inspecting, and while they were inspecting, there was a window open and a cow stuck its head in the window, and you can't have this, So they shut this cheese factory down, and he bought it and started a little factory called Pinecraft woodturner, or Pinecraft wood shop, or furniture, I should say. And he made furniture out of pine, a lot of pine. And so Bob did most of the talking. And so when we were ready to leave, I said, do you need any turnings? And he looked at me and he said, yeah. And so pretty soon I was turning bedposts. They were early American style, so they got a lot of decoration on them. And I turned a lot of them. And then he had me he made tables, big dining room tables, with an 8-inch square post. And it was this much square, and then it was about that much turning, and then a little square. And I put these on as shopsmith, and I was turning away on them, and making them right and left. And then he had some more that were 6-inch in diameter and some 5-inch diameter. If they were 5 or 6-inch in diameter, then there were 2 posts to the table. So I turned for him quite a bit. And at this time, my wife and I had our first child, and the house that we had was this brick house was a little bit on the small side, so we bought a different house. And we're still living there for another 2 weeks. This is 53 years ago almost. And so I wanted a different lathe. I wanted something more. By this time I had 3 shopsmiths. And so I had, I had mentioned that before. And so I had needed more room. And so we found this house and bought it. And I was doing this turning for Pinecraft furniture pretty regular. And helped me make the payments on the house. And my wife was also a teacher, and she quit working, but she was a year older than me, and she had had a year ahead of me in the pay scale, and she had a master's, and I didn't have my master's yet. So our income was cut by about 55%. So this turning was coming in pretty handy, because I needed a little bit of money now and then. And so this working for this Pinecraft was kind of handy. And then one day, we were there for a while, and my son was about less than a year and a half. I'd made some toys for him, and he was playing in the yard, and I'd go out and watch him. So, if I wasn't doing some of this turning for Pinecraft, and so there was another part to this story. Bob Schultz came into my room one day at the end of the day, and he had a flyer. And he said, "There's all kinds of wood from Frank Paxton." I said, "No, I don't. I get enough wood from Pinecraft." And I said, "I don't have any money. I don't have money for a lot of that stuff right now." And so I looked in there and brought it home and looked at it, and there was some wood in there that I was kind of interested in, and it was very tight grain, soft wood, and it was very good for carving. Well, I didn't do any carving, and but I was very interested in this wood, quite interested in this wood, and so I came back to school the next day, and I said it was called Carina. And they didn't know what, Frank Paxton didn't know what the name of the wood was, because they bought a bunch of it out of Africa. And they named it after his daughter, Carina. It was just nuts. It's how dumb this story is. But anyway, I said, I want 2 pieces about this long, 3.5 feet or so, maybe 4 to 6 inches wide and 2 inches thick. I said, I'd like 2 pieces like that. So he said, okay. He called in his order. He bought so much wood at the end of the year for the next year that he got free shipping. So he himself bought about $300 worth of exotics. And I bought these 2 pieces of wood. And so I it was about $20 for the 2 of them. Wasn't much money. And of course, this is 50 years ago. And they came about the middle of May. They came, and I put them out in my car in the back of the station wagon, and I just left them there. I didn't want them. I had no use for them. I just didn't want them. I just left them in my car. And so we're out. So then it got to be summer, and like I said, I helped my wife with taking care of my son a little bit, and he'd play with these toys, and she got to do some of her stuff that she couldn't get done at home inside the house with this little guy. And so I was sitting out in the front yard with my son, and this car came around the corner, and it came real slow. And we live on a street that doesn't go out to Wisconsin Avenue. It's 2 blocks away, and so it's not real well known. It's Eugene Street. You have to go 1 block this way or 1 block that way to get out to Wisconsin Avenue. So it's not much traffic on there. And it was fairly new at the time, a lot of new houses at the time. And so cars would come by, and they'd look at my number in a house and keep driving to further down the street. This time this car came around real slow, and he looked at the house. And I just kind of looked at my son, and I realized this guy is stopping and backing up. And he came up the driveway, and he said, he was a salesman for Frank Paxton Lumber, and I thought, that's why they wanted my name. Oh, nuts. And he said, you bought some wood? I said, yeah. And I said, I was wishing he'd go away. I didn't have any money to buy wood. So anyway, he said, you bought this wood. He said, what'd you do with it? I said, the garage was open. And I said, it's right there in the garage. It's in the back of the car. And he went in there and he looked. And looked at it really kind of, what's going on here? And he said, came in, what are you going to do with it? And I told him again, I don't want it. And so I was trying to kind of get rid of him so I didn't have to buy something. So anyway, he kept looking at it, and he was kind of persistent, and I was kind of wishing I don't have any money to buy this wood. And so he looked over his car was in the garage, and it was just a 2-car garage, and I only had this one car, and I had a step ladder, 5-foot step ladder, and I had turned some of these Christmas ornaments, and I had just finished them, and I hung them up on all the places underneath the steps, and he looked over there and he saw them. And he says, I want some of them. I want to take 2 of them, or 1 of each ornament. I had only 4 ornaments at the time. He said, I want to take 4 of them to Kiwani. I didn't even know where Kiwani was. And so he gets back on this 2 pieces of wood. He says, what are you going to do with those 2 pieces of wood? And I finally told him, I said, well, I'm going to go home to Minnesota, and I'm going to get there between Father's Day and my dad's birthday in July. And one of them is for my dad's birthday, and one of them is for Father's Day. Oh, okay. And this is he carves, and so that's what I wanted him for. So anyway, he gets back on these ornaments, and I know I finally got rid of them. Figured I'd never see him again. So a month goes by, and the doorbell rang. I was inside. Here's this Don Van Ryan guy again. And I couldn't get rid of him. Finally did. And Kay said to me, my wife Kay said, he's sure persistent. So July left. By this time I'd given my dad, we'd been home and on there for our summer visit. And along comes August. Son of a gun, he comes again. Couldn't get rid of him 2 times. So finally he said, I want to take these 4 ornaments and show them to Dick Court from Sabota Industries in Kiwani, if you know where Sabota Industries was. So anyway, I said, yeah, okay, finally. And he said, no, he said, you won't hear from him because I go up into northern Wisconsin, up into upper UP, and I get down there Friday, and then by noon on Friday, I'm usually in Kiwani, and then I go home to the suburb of Chicago. So he said, you won't hear from him. And so I kind of forgot about it. Well, and he said, I know you won't, I'll be there Friday, but he said, you won't hear from him then. That's his busiest day. And I thought, okay. So then he said, but you'll hear from him. So anyway, Saturday morning came, it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. The phone rang. It was Dick Court. He wanted to come and see me, him and his wife. And I know, okay. So he came. And he had these 4 ornaments with him. And I showed him all these ornaments on the ladder that I was going to sell on consignment as Pinecraft from about October to December. And he said, I'll take the whole works. Might as well sell them now. And he says, just keep making them. Just keep making them. So I made them and made them. And the end of the month comes along, and this Don Van Ryan comes by and takes a couple of boxes, and this went on for a couple of months, and it got to be December, and he got a call from this Dick Court, and he says, don't make any more. But he says, I don't want, he said, no, he didn't say it. He said, I don't want any more. But he says, keep making them. Well, what I found out, it took 2 years because he didn't want to tell me, but his factory was right on the highway. As you come from the south, it drops down, gets to the business district, and then it made a turn around the Kiwani River. And his factory was right there. And then he built a grandfather clock that was 48 feet high or 50 feet high. Some of you remember that. And so what happened was Chicago had big apartments full of mostly of widows. Had small places. They came in and bought these ornaments. Sold, sold all kinds of them, and that went on for years. And then I started selling in Amana, and I'm still selling in Amana. I'm not making any more, but I still have stock, and I'm still selling there. But anyway, getting back to what your display was here, you talk about finish many times, and you talk about how you did this, the detail. Well, I make maybe 100 spindles for somebody, and I don't do any finishing on them at all. Most of the time they're put in and installed in a house, and then they're painted or they're matched the finish in the rest of the house. So I'm turning a lot of spindles, and it goes on and on forever. So like I say, my work is very different than yours. So is anybody? I'm approaching this from the standpoint that I'm only doing spindles. Do any of you do a lot of spindles? I don't see a lot of hands. So you see, my turning is quite different. And I want to turn, I'm production turning, I'm trying to turn fast. Let's see here on my notes. Well, I should start with
What is your technique for getting them the same? If you have two spindles, I assume you want them to look the same. How do you make them the same?
That's a very good question, and I can answer that I hope I can answer it pretty completely. What I would do is I would make a story stick. And this story stick would be a little longer than the spindle, just maybe a half-inch longer than the spindle. And I would draw a shape of the spindle on there so I could see it. And I would put measurements on there and so on. And then I would take the spindle and look at it where there's a point sticking out or a cove or a top of a bead or something. I would take a triangular file and file notches where every one of these particular spaces or changes in the shape would appear. You know what I'm saying? Like the top of a bead or the bottom of a cove or something like that. And then I would take, they were usually wood that was about a 1/4 inch thick. And I would take this wood that I'd done some of this work on, and I would take on the back side, of it, I would take a router and route a 1/2 inch route thing, the depth of this. It's about I don't know what it is. It's pretty thin, but this is a strip of magnetic material. You'd have a stick-em on here and it would peel off. It is just a strap piece. and I would put this, almost the whole length of that on the bottom side. And when I put this on my tool rest and that's spinning, and these notches that I'd cut in there, this kept that story stick from moving around. And then on the back side, this piece would be about that wide, and the strip was in there. On the ends, I would drill shallow holes. Maybe a 1/2 inch hole, but it was only, it was about went halfway through that material, or maybe a little more. And I would put colors. I would put a drill on the end of that board. I'd have that hole, and there were a variety of holes, and I would have colors, red, green, blue. On the other end, I might have some other colors. So I'd have and I'd set calipers to those colors. On that story stick, I'd have colored where those calipers went. So that's spinning around. I wouldn't even turn the lathe off. I mean, I just when I put a piece in there, I tried very hard to put that piece of wood in there, turn it, and when it came out, it was done. I didn't have to stop and look at it. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So you see, I'm organizing it, or.
So you used a lot of calipers then, right?
Yeah, I had about maybe 15 calipers. And some were little ones, because that's all they had to be, and some were bigger ones, and I had some real big ones, so that's why I had so many.
Did you have the calipers colored too?
Yeah, the heads of the calipers, that round part there would be painted red or green or blue, so I knew where I was all the time.
What was your increments of measurement?
Your increments of measurement.
Yeah, I heard that, and picas. Yeah, picas.
I love it, yeah.
Must be in the printing business.
Yeah, I was in the printing business, and the pica is a fantastic measuring system. And if you're talking about doing something 1 3/16 or something, picas were fantastic. And they beat the metric system too, because it was smaller increments. You're dividing it. In the pica system, I didn't think I'd be talking about this, but the pica system is dividing an inch into 72 parts. There's 6 picas to an inch and 12 points to each pica. That's 72 in an inch. So I had 72 measurements without a fraction. Make sense?
Oh, yeah, I remember that from printing class 60 years ago.
Yeah. Well, it's still used, I'm sure, today. And then if I didn't like what that was doing, I'd use agates too. And that's another system of measurement in the printing system. Yeah. So I'm borrowing from other industries here, you see, to do some of this stuff.
Background.
Yeah.
But it was one you were familiar with.
One I was very familiar with. I'd worked at it since I was 15 years old. And that's changing the subject, but I worked there as a printer's devil. And I'd worked there about 4 months, and there were 2 guys that ran linotype, if you remember what linotypes were. And I'm getting off on my story here, but the one guy was deaf, and him and I had to do he did a lot of the typesetting, but the other guy did that's all he did. This guy did some other things once in a while, so I'd be helping him with that. And so I could talk with my fingers with him. I knew it's a simple way of talking to deaf people using the alphabet: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's kind of thing. So I was talking to him, and he got upset with the work there, and he quit. And the boss tried to keep him, and he told me to talk to him what he wanted to say. It was kind of funny, but he quit. So when he left, I said to the boss, "Can I learn how to run that linotype?" And he said, "Yeah." So that's at 15 years old, I was running linotype, and that's what I did for a number of years. As a matter of fact, I am probably the last living tramp printer, which is a different thing totally. I'm way off the subject here, attorney. But a tramp printer is from the Civil War, and there was unrest in the country, and people who were typesetters had a stick, a composing stick. You'd set different lengths, put it in their back pocket, and they'd go get a job, and they didn't like it, they'd leave, and they were called tramp printers. Well, what I did when I was going to college in the summer, I could advertise in the Minnesota Newspaper Union Society or something for free. And I'd just say I would run linotype if you look at these little towns, they had a linotype operator. Never give them a vacation because they had to be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Never gave them a vacation so you could go someplace for a week or something. So I'd advertise there in the summer, and I just try and print it. I'd go to a town for 2 weeks or a week. The last time printing job I had was 4 days. And I left, And the reason I left is on that Saturday I was getting married. So
114 years ago.
yeah.
Hey, Ron, do you use mostly spindle gouges, or are you a skew?
I used a lot of gouges, but I use a skew, a lot of times, very much. And these are tools that I have here. And there's one tool I'm going way off the subject here. I can pass this around. You can see what it looks like. It's magnetic material, but what it does is when you put, if you look at the fellow that demonstrated here last month, I was sitting about there or something, and one time I thought, ooh, this isn't so good. And that's what turners do. They'd set the tool down there, and the tool was, say like this, but it had lumps on it. And so what happened is this tool was going like this on the lathe, and I thought it's going to fall off. So if you look at my tools, I got to remember where I put this down. If you look at my tools, are quite different. I didn't grab the right one, but it's not bad. Are straight, because my hand I don't have to cut this finger off, so my hand will go around that little tool. I made them all the same. And I put that magnetic strip in there so that the tool doesn't fall off, as well as on that story stick. So that sits there like that. Some of the other differences in my tools, I might have a better one here. Besides this magnetic strip, I've color-coded. Skews are blue. I could make this a little bigger for a bigger skew or smaller. And gouges are different color and so on. And so I've used these inserts right here. You see there's 2 screws on here to hold this. This is a small 1/4-inch skew. But there's 2 set screws in here. Buy this insert thing. And there's 2 screws on here. So I don't have that sticking way out and vibrating. I can bring it back to stability. Less vibration. Okay, this wears down. I've sharpened it a few times. It's not long enough. So I need to have an Allen wrench to pull these loose and then pull it out 1/4 of an inch, or let's say. Where's that doggone Allen wrench? I've got my hand around it. It's in the end of the tool set. So if I'm looking for it, I've already got it in my hand, but it's in there. Now it's held in there, goes in there, and it's held in there by a little magnet in there. But I can easily have a little sharp gadget, and there's a notch here, pry it out. I'm back to work. Hopefully in 20 seconds or something like that.
Can you pass that around?
Yes, I was just going to do that, sure. What I'll do, though, instead, see, here's a different tool. This one needs a little work, but I can pass them around. Start over here or something. Look at them. By the way, this two pails of these tools, there's one tool here that I don't own. I have to keep, but these tools are for you guys. I mean, sort them out. You can have them. So there's some tools here.
Ron, what do you use a 1/4-inch skew for?
Spindle work. Oh yeah, find little do beads so neat, and find little work. This is a turning tool that I'm just giving these away. So there's quite some odd stuff in here. Down in here, here they are. Here's I didn't know what to do with these. I used to use the wood on these. See, I'd buy a tool and I'd use the wood for something. And so these are just useless to me. That's too small, too short. I can't get my hand around it the way I want. I can't control. So, did I pass that around? Any questions more about that?
Over that, long time of turning, did you always enjoy turning, or was it just a means to?
Well, I enjoyed it, yeah. It was a challenge, always a challenge. If you look at, are you familiar with the Galloway House? Anybody know? You're getting close. Fond du Lac. The Galloway House was, the Galloway family was here for many years, and there's a Galloway place in Neenah that I think they make M&Ms there or something, but it's an old company, old name. And they were in Fond du Lac in the beginning, I guess, and they built a house there. And it was quite a mansion at the time in the 1800s, so it was old. And here about 30 years ago or so, the city was going to tear it down. And from what I gathered, there were about 6 to 10 to 12 women who were kind of shakers in Fond du Lac. And they said, no, you shouldn't tear that down. It's
Got together and helped raise money to buy the house
They bought the house
and restore it.
and restored it. Mm-hmm. And what's the guy's name in New London? Terry Lieb got the job. Terry Lieb got the job. Terry Lieb, I did a lot of work for Terry Lieb because he did a lot of restoration of houses in Oshkosh. And Oshkosh was at one time the chair capital of the United States. That's where more chairs were built. Why it got, huh?
I thought Sheboygan was the chair capital.
Well, so Oshkosh had it at least for a while.
We were chair city.
Okay. And anyway, he got the job of restoring the Galloway house in Fond du Lac. And so it was quite a job because there were 100 spindles across the porch up above. They were about this big a diameter, and smaller, and about this tall. And so they came with all this wood, and I turned these 100 spindles, and he picked them up, and then he came with 2 big pieces of wood where the cupolas on top. I got $100 a piece for them. It took me half a day to turn them, or more than that. And then the next day or so, a few days later, he came with 50 pieces of wood. And there was a porch up on the front, and one on the end, and one on the back. They had about 8 spindles on each side, so there was about 50 spindles there. And I made them. And pretty soon, a couple of weeks later, he came back with about 30 pieces of wood. There was a stairway inside. Had a little few here and then went up and across. And so I was kind of, man, my pants doesn't fit my wall. It's getting kind of nice, And so I thought 180, it was 180 spindles on one house. Wow. And it got cold. And so I didn't see them. And spring came along. And needed about 30 more spindles. A rug shaker porch. It had gotten cold. It had moved inside to work in the wintertime. Wound up doing about 205 spindles for that house. And that's another story too, but anyway, my wife said I shouldn't tell this story, but I'll tell it to you. I got guts. There was a woman that called me up one time, and she was very in need of some spindles and a stairway in a house. She bought this house at the time. The house was 108 years old. I remember that. And somebody had taken about 6 spindles out of this stairway, and they built where they could hang clothes when people came in the wintertime. And these people bought this house, and they didn't like that closet in the middle of this stairway. So they looked all over in the house, couldn't find the spindles. So anyway, they looked, and somehow they got my name. And she lived in an area where there were about 4 turners who were turning bowls and giving them away and passing them around the neighborhood and stuff. And so she called me up and she said, do you need these spindles? And I said, okay. Yeah, I said, I could probably do them for you. And so we set a time because she worked at 7 o'clock in the evening. So 7 o'clock came, she came in with this spindle. and it was fairly long and skinny, so it was a hard one to turn, you know, because of vibration in there. And she was telling me, this is what you're going to do. They got to be perfect. They got to be finished perfect, and maybe you should install them. Well, I don't buy the wood. I do the turning, but I don't do any finishing, and I don't do any installing. So I said, kind of a little cool to her. And so we sat down at the table, and I measured the spindle, and she says, what are you doing? I said, I'm measuring it to see what I need to do. And she started giving me more orders, and it had to be done in 2 weeks. And I realized she'd been dealing with these bowl turners that were giving her stuff away, and she wanted all this work done. I maybe want you to install them too. And I didn't do that, you know. So I looked at her and I said, I think you're at the wrong house. I went to the door and opened. I said, you can be excused. I wasn't rude to her. I was just said, this is not what I do. And so when these spindles came along for this porch deal, I was doing them. This is 2-3 months later, and she was about a month before that. And I called up Terry Lieb and I said, I told you I'd have these by Friday, but I said, can I give them to you Monday? Yeah, that's all right. So I turned all of them except one. In the meantime, the reason I did do the last one was somebody was doing a demonstration at the NINA meeting and wound up in the hospital. So the president of the club called me and said, could you do a demonstration on spindle on Saturday? So I saved this one and I took it to the meeting, and I had one done with the pummels on the end and one not done. And so I got to the meeting, and we had a lathe up there, and I got my tools on the table and all, made sure everything was in order, and had to write everything all set up. And here the meeting started. And I looked up, and there's that woman sitting back there. And I thought, oh man, I wish I'd known this before, because I could say some Neil Diggs that nobody'd get except her. And so I put this spindle in the lathe, and I had turned already 23 of them. My kidney up here knew where all the moves were, and so I put this piece of wood in there, and where there was a lot of wood missing, because it dipped down, I cut in and a little bit with a parting tool, and then take the parting tool and go like that, and the chips would fly all over. I had wood all over the front of this place up there, and then I got done turning it, and I sanded it, and then I turned the lathe off. And so people kind of applauded a little bit like you do here, thank you. And then I got lucky. This guy says, I got a question. I said, yeah, go ahead. He says, how much you charge for that spindle? I didn't want to get even. I wanted to get ahead, So I said, well, they delivered the wood, they supplied the wood, and they picked it up, and so on. So I said, I get like $22 a spindle. And I said, but I don't know what the wood cost. I don't know. They delivered them, so I didn't have to drive. I said, somebody's going to stand on a ladder, put these up. By the time they get done paying for them, they'll probably be $50 to $60 a piece. So I got ahead. At the end of that, this woman got up, didn't look one way, just walked right out the door. I haven't seen her since. But sometimes I wasn't rude to her, but she just wasn't with it. Had some learning to do.
So after you traded in the EV, what did you end up turning on for?
Yeah, you're taking my note. Did you read my notes? No. Oh, okay. What I did was, I was looking for a lathe, and my wife grew up in Lake Mills. You know where that is? Yep. Right east of Madison. Yep. And he was a shop teacher, and he was retired. And at this time, houses had spindles in them, but they were just straight spindles, modern. And he says, "What do you want a lathe for?" And I said, "Well, let's go into Vol Machine." That wasn't too far down the road in Milwaukee. Vol, I don't know if you know who Vol Machine was. They sold a lot of woodworking equipment and metalworking equipment to schools and industry. And they were very accommodating. So we were down there visiting one middle of the summer, and I said, "Let's go into Vol Machine. I'm looking for a regular lathe now." And so I went in there and talked to the salesman, and he said, "Yeah, we got this lathe here," and it didn't look like it was much more than what I had. It was old and it was used, and so I said, "I'm looking for something a little bigger, hopefully," and so on. He says, "Well, just a minute." And he said, we went into this room. He said, "Let's go into this other room." They must have just gotten him in while I was there and set him up. There was a room the size of a basketball court, and there was nothing in this room except they'd put about 12 lathes in kind of an arc. And they looked like they were just set up for display, and that was all that's in this big room. And I looked at him, and I thought, there's no way I'll ever own anything like that. No way. And one of them, there were 4-foot beds on them, and the headstock and the tailstock took up 2 feet, so you could only turn 2 feet. But there was one that was 8 feet long. Spindle, man, I looked at that thing and I'm drooling, and I said, I'll never own anything like that. Holy cow. So he says, "You like them?" I says, "Yeah." I said, "What's the deal with that long lathe?" And he said, "You want the good news or the bad news?" I said, "Give me the good news." $100. I about fell over. And so I said, "What's the bad news?" 3-phase. You know what that is. So I found out I could have 3-phase power come to my house, whether I used it or not, would be $100 a month to run that lathe. Now he said, "Well, to tell you what you could do, you could put a 3-phase converter on there." And he said, "We want nothing to do with it." He said, "We know where to get it. We don't know how long it take to be ordered. If you want it, you pay for that, and we'll order it. It'll be sent to your house. It won't come here. We want nothing to do with it." And then he said, "When you get it, we'll keep that lathe for you, and then you can come and get it." And that's what I did. The 3-phase came, and there's more to the story than that. I got it, and I hired an ex-student of mine that had pickups. He was into pickups, this kid. He a nice kid. And so I asked him if he'd drive down to, west of Milwaukee and pick this thing up. So we drove down there and we got it. I paid him some money for it. I don't remember what I paid him. And I got it home and I got this thing all wired up. And it didn't run right. It went, and then would start going. And it was very troublesome to start. Very troublesome. And it had a wheel down here that you turned, and I put a 0 on there and a 1, 2, 3, 4 in Roman numerals. And that, when you were in the 0, it just kind of hummed, and you went to this 1, it would start, and it would run at about 600 RPM, somewhere in there. You turned again, it went at about 1200, then you went it again at about 1800, and then you went it one more, it would go to 3600. And the teachers at the school had put a pin in that wheel and an angle iron here so it would only go to the 3 speeds. They didn't want these kids running that thing at 3,000 RPM. So I'm taking that off right away. And but it was very troublesome to start. And I called him up and I said, "Why does it do that?" He said, "I think there's something wrong with your starter." So I thought, okay, I didn't know where they were because in 3-phase wiring, you just use all black wires. So I put a wire, an orange wire and a blue wire, and I strung them through there, and I put so I could trace where the wires were going. And I sent this drawing to him, and he said, "Well, I think your starter's bad. You should buy one of these other lights, take the starter off of that one, and put it on that one." Well, this might work. So I sent him this letter, and he sold me the second lathe. one of the short ones. And I went down there with this same kid, and we loaded this on the on his back of this truck, and we're ready to drive. Oh, here's this letter. He says, "You got this wired wrong. You need another wire in there." That solved the problem. So now I wound up with 2 Olivers. The Olivers, yeah. Oh man, they're direct drive. There's no the only turning part. The only thing that moved in there was the headstock. You know, there was no belts, no pulleys, and I used them for years. And I'll tell you what, I used them for 24 years, I think. And then I belonged to IWCS. Everybody, IWCS, you all know what that is? It's an organization that was started, I think, in 1948 by a bunch of botanists or something. And it was based on IWCS is International Wood Collectors Society. That's where I got all the bells that I have on this wall of, I think there's 1,600 different woods, which is embarrassingly small to have only 1,600 species. Because most collectors collected the standard sample, and they'd put them on shelves, and they didn't turn me on. They just kind of blank. The standard sample was 3 inches wide, 1/2 inch thick, and 6 inches long, and it was labeled, and you could write on it, and you could number them, and you'd build shelves and have these. But they didn't excite me, and so I was making these bells, and I thought I had about 50 species of wood of these bells. And I thought some people collected other things. Like one of my best friends in there collected grafts. His collection was on a tree. They'd have a tree and then they'd graft another. He'd collect the grain of that graft. Very interesting, you know. And other people collected, one of them, you know, that little dish that you turned, he turned smaller dishes and had about 400 of them on the shelves, you know. Well, anyway, I decided I'd collect my bells. And this is an article that I wrote for Better Homes and Gardens Wood magazine. And they sent me this after I did the article. I wish I hadn't written it because they started telling me, well, we have the copyright on your work. It was kind of sad. But anyway, this is a cross section of the bells that I made that I have the collection of. I made an acorn, and there's a tree that was turned, and a snowman, and I'll pass this around. You can look at it. Now, what was that? I lost my train of thought there. What was it? What did somebody ask me something and I got onto that? Oh yeah, well the Oliver lathes. After I was at an IWCS meeting in Florida. I would go to Florida in the wintertime for about it had a big meeting in January, and it was nice to get away. This was after I retired, and a whole bunch of the collectors are turners, and there was 2 guys in there, and they were partners in a company, small company, and this one, he was real aggressive and kind of bossy, and I just said no. And the other guy was very soft-spoken, and I started talking to him, and they sold inverters. You know what an inverter is? Instead of a 3-phase converter, this was an inverter. So but instead of being $125 or whatever it was, $75, whatever, I can't remember what I paid for that converter. These were about $550. And I talked to him and said, this sounded pretty good, but 500 and some bucks. I'm not sure it'll work or whatever. This next winter I went down there, and I was getting to know this soft-spoken guy pretty well. And he said, well, sell you this for $550. I think, and I bought a second one later. I think it was $700, but for the other lathe. And anyway, it was a funny time. Might have been a different meeting than the winter meeting, but I bought it, and he said, I'll send it to you. And I got it. I didn't open the box. It wasn't that I didn't dare. I just didn't open it because in 2 days I was leaving to go to the IWCS meeting. This year it was, the international meeting was in Calgary a week before the Stampede, and we got to go to the Stampede. So that was, and then from there my cousin had family in Seattle, so the four of us went out to Seattle. So I was going to be gone for 4 weeks. I said I didn't open it because I'm going to be gone for 4 weeks. I'm going to open it when I got home. He says, don't open it, send it back. I sent you the wrong one. I got the specs wrong. So when I got home, the other one was there, and I wired it up, and I couldn't believe now I had variable speed from his lathe could go up to 3,600 RPMs, and I had reverse in variable speed. I was in business now. So anyway, getting back to this story about this woman that I opened the door for. I just, like I saw it at that meeting a couple months, or a month or so later, and she just disappeared. Okay, what else do we got here? I'll tell you another story about a guy. Let me see my notes here, and I'll get the names right. I guess I told you about my college turning a little bit. Well, in my college turning, I took more classes, and I have lots of turning on my stuff in my living room. I counted the turnings in my living room one time, and I counted two sets of numbers. Because we had a chair, and had some turnings on it, and I bought it. But I had 2 end tables. I think I had 180 turnings in our living room, and most people didn't even see them because they were just blended right in.
That would be pica?
Huh?
Does that mean pica?
Yeah, they were all done in picas. I wanted to get to a story here. Hmm? I didn't teach students how to turn. I just taught printing. So we were into picas a lot, you know. So if they didn't get to know that, they were lost. Really shortly they would. Yeah. I had sheets of paper that explained it, and they'd catch on to it pretty fast. And because the type was all in picas and points,
Everything is pica, so you're not doing any converting. It's
just using that. Well, the problem here is, and I often wondered about it, was you'd set everything in picas, but you went to cut the paper in inches. The paper cutter was set up in inches.
well, that's true because I know when we put it on the printing,
Yeah.
but we didn't really have to worry too much.
No, you didn't have to worry about it. It blended right in. Once you knew the 2 measurements, and they blended right together. I want to tell you another little story that after I retired and I was doing more and more of this turning, and I was making more and more of these ornaments, I was always looking for wood. And so one day somebody told me about a Lipticon. You know, anybody know what a Lipticon is? A Lipticon is, it's a company in Little Chute. And it's a company that makes the moldings around windows. But some of these windows are round and half round, and so they're making wood trim for all kinds of people. And so somebody told me that they throw wood out that they can't use, the too short, out in the front of the shop. You familiar with that at all? Yeah, okay. And so I was always looking for this wood for my little ornaments, cut-offs. And so I found out where it was, if you drive on 41 and you're by Little Chute, you see their dust collector out. It's on the south side of 41. And so I went over there, and sure enough, there was a wood pile out there. So I went in and I said, that's wood that I can take pieces from? Yeah, you can take as much as you want. Well, I was looking for the 2-inch stuff for my little thing. I filled up the trunk of my car, and I thought that was pretty good. So I used up the wood, and I went back about a month later, and there was another pile of wood. This time I had a couple of my bells with me, and I had them in a little bag, and I went in and I said, who is the owner? And they said, John Wiley. I said, would you give this bag to him? And so I went out there, put the wood in the car, and went back a couple more times with the same thing. So this 4th time or 5th time I went there, and I had a couple of bells with me again, and I loaded the car up, and the secretary comes on and says, John wants to talk to you in his office. And I thought, I talk too much wood. I won't do it again. I'm sorry. And, I shouldn't have done that. And so he said, he'll be right back. He's fixing a problem in the shop. So a couple of minutes later, he comes in, he sits down, and he says hi and introduces himself and sits down at his desk, and he pulls the drawer open, and he puts all these bells I'd given him. And I thought, maybe I'm not too much trouble. Anyway, he said, he questioned me very carefully, kind of slowly, because he knew I'd been a teacher, and he didn't want me making that in a school shop. You know what I mean? I was long gone from that. He said, where do you turn these? I said, I turn them at home. I have 2 couple lathes. Actually, I had 4 of them. And at that time, and he says, and what do you do with them? And I said, I sell them. He was real slow about this. And so finally he said, could I buy some? Well, no, I sat up in the chair a little better, I'm not in too much trouble. And he thought, well, maybe, I thought, he's got about 20 employees. Maybe he wants some for his family, or maybe he'll buy 25, or maybe as many as 30 of them. And so I said, hey, how much you get for them? And at the time I was wholesaling them for $4 a piece. And so I thought, hey, maybe 30, so I could pick up $100 here. And he's kind of slowly talking about, and he says, yeah, I'd like to buy some, and would you make them for me? I said, I think I could. He says, well, he's getting close to Christmas. This was about the first week in October. He says, I need 550 of them. Well, now the chair, I was glad there were armrests on the chair because I about fell off. So anyway, we decided on a wood, and he loaded the wood in my car, and I got to turn 1,650 turnings here. 550. I got to make 1,650 turnings because I turned them in the rough and turned a 1 1/8 inch piece about that long that went into this collet chuck that held them better than a 4-jaw chuck. And you can put your fist into it when it's running, and there it is. Nothing's happening. Very safe. So I had to pre-turn them, then I had to turn them. So now I've got 1,100 turnings, but they want a clapper in them, so I need another 550 clappers. So that makes it 1,650, and he says, can you get them done? I said, So I went home and I turned like crazy, and then the requirement was different because he said, after I turned them, he said, don't put any finish on them. I want them just raw without the clappers in them. And he had a secretary that was very good at calligraphy, and she did this, putting ellipticon inside carefully, so there was an ad in there, so to speak. And he gave them away at Christmas. Well, I found out he had a quite elaborate catalog or flyer, and these got sent to people he didn't even know that would buy these windows from him. And so he gave them away. So I got all these done. I couldn't believe I got them done in time. Well, after she put this calligraphy in them, I'd get them back and then I'd finish them. Well, I got all these bells done. Then I started turning clappers to put in. So anyway, got them done, and I delivered them, and he said, would you do this again next year? Yeah. I said, let's not wait till this time of the year to do them. Let's get them to me in May. Let's start in May. And he says, well, I budgeted, so I can't pay it till the end of the year. I said, I don't care. I don't want time to do them. You can pay me at the end of the year. So I did this for about 10 or 11 years. Different woods, walnut a couple times, ash. And I remember the last time I did them for him, it was hickory, which was really beautiful to turn because it's hard, you know. And so I brought him in there, and he said, next year we're going to use this wood. He gave me a piece of the wood, and I about fainted. You can never guess what kind of wood it was. But I'll tell you. Cigar box cedar. So soft you can't turn it. That's all you can do with it is make cigar box out of it. You can run your fingernail in it, put big dents in it. How are you going to turn it? You ride the bevel, you crush them. I said, I can't turn it. I think he'd already purchased the wood. And John was kind of, if you went on the wrong side of him, he was done with you. That was the end of it. We got a fair amount of time left, or what's the time frame here? Keep going?
Ron, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Favorite wood to turn, and then what was the most common type of wood that you would have for like the columns and things like that?
Well, the columns were, for them, were mostly soft maple. There were some other woods once in a while, but most of the time it was that. It was never stuff that was soft. I don't remember doing any. And I did other turnings for him too. He realized I turned. So sometimes he had something he needed 3 or 4 turnings of, instead of I do them. So we got along pretty good for a while. I'm just trying to think of what else I could share with you.
What did you do for a dust collection?
What I did for a dust collector was, it's a very good question because it's kind of got several stories to it. I bought a dust collector from Grizzly, 2 horsepower, was 220, and I put it out in the garage. And I drilled a hole, 4.5 inch diameter hole on the joist there, and I could put a 4-inch plastic PVC pipe. And that gave me trouble because I had PVC pipes hanging, and then there'd be a light string for a light, a fluorescent light, and that string would be like this angle because of static electricity. I was afraid of fire and blowing up. So I wound up drilling holes about every 3 inches in this pipe all along in the ceiling. It was quite a bit of pipe because I had it to all kinds of machines. And I took a wire and bent and put an insert so that just the knob of it went in, like this, and so then I grounded that, and that solved the problem. But I made my own blast gates because why not? And then I used that dust collector quite a lot, and I used it as I turned, especially the bells because it's small. And so on the lathe, I built 2-inch piece out 3 places, and then I had 2 pieces of conduit pipe in there. And then the dust collector I used this flexible hose that you use on a dryer, just from the machine to the main part. And then I could slide that thing along as I turned spindles. And so I didn't wear a face mask. Very rarely did I wear a face mask because it was very effective. It didn't take, and when you started turning, it didn't take the big chunks of shavings, but you don't inhale them anyway. And so, but when I sanded, it was very effective.
Good. I've been waiting for somebody to ask this, and nobody has. So I'm going to ask you, how do you sharpen your tool?
Okay. Okay, you just opened a new double container of worms. I never owned a grinder. I sharpen the same way they're sharpened in a factory. And they don't sharpen in a factory with a grinder. I did the same way they did it. And how the tools are sharpened is, well, here's a book. I want this book back, but there's some stuff in here you can see that there's some earrings in there. I actually have some earrings with me. This I want back, and you can take them out and look at them, but I want them back. I carry them around this. It was a way to carry around my samples, but let's get back to the sharpening. The sharpening in a factory is done on a belt sander. And it's sharpened very quickly. It does a couple of things. It works very fast. It's easy to control. And they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time tempering that tool so it's hard, and when you sharpen it stays hard. When you sharpen on a belt sander, you don't lose that temper. It stays hard. And when I would be turning a spindle or something, I had a belt sander in the back on a bench and behind my lathe. It's right here. And I wouldn't even turn the lathe off. I just turn it on, and I could sharpen. Most of the time, if I couldn't sharpen in 10 seconds or less, I was mad. I think I'm done unless you have some more questions. Covered most of what I wanted to cover.
Anybody else have any more questions for Ron? Thank you, Ron.
Okay, well, thank you.